Hey there, this is your pal Pally, and welcome back to Git Er Raid. Warlords of Draenor beta testing continues on with some more heroic mode bosses. Get ready for a complex shield/barrier/energy mechanic in this next one. Korog in Highmaul is the second to last boss in this instance, and really ups the mechanics difficulty. As always, mechanics can change from the time a fight is beta tested to when it is actually released live. So like I said, complex mechanics abound in this encounter with Korog. First off, he can't be damaged by magical damage, as he has a huge nullification barrier. You have to bring this barrier down, and then he'll start to recharge it. Only then can you have someone absorb some of that energy and get a barrier of their own. They use that barrier to protect the raid from some orbs that come down and splash a bunch of AoE damage on the raid. Oh yeah, and there are like 4 other main abilities the boss has that the raid has to respond to. Confused yet? I wouldn't blame you. So let's break down the absorbing mechanic first. So boss has their shield barrier. You need to break that by doing magic damage to them. Okay, no big deal. As soon as the shield is broken, the boss will go to the center of the room and start channeling energy back onto himself. At that point, you can do full damage to the boss, and he spawns some adds called volatile anomalies. These need to be picked up by the tank, and we'll talk about them in a little bit. But for now, you can have one raid member, usually a ranged DPS, hop into the channel of energy near the boss. This will give that raid member caustic energy. They will take some arcane damage for every second they stay in there, and also have a reduced healing debuff of 35%. So it's harder to heal them. This damage and debuff can't be immuned by things like deterrent or pally bubbles. You can duck in and out of the caustic energy, and it grants you a nullification barrier. The longer you absorb the energy during the phase, the bigger your shield. It would be recommended for healers to bomb this person with heals, at least the first few times through. Also note that at least on beta, only one person can get a shield per recharged phase, and it will be the first person who enters the energy. So be careful that people aren't hanging out in the middle when this occurs, or else the wrong person might get picked for getting the barrier. So what's this big shield for? Well, it absorbs all magical damage that hits the person with that shield. While this means that that person is now more likely to survive, you do need to apply the shield to the right thing. That thing is called overflowing energy, and it's these orbs coming from the ceiling. Whenever they strike the ground, they will first off likely kill anyone without a shield being hit directly by it. But when they hit the ground, they do a big chunk of raid-wide AoE damage for each one that hits. More and more of these orbs will drop as the fight goes on. So maybe you've put it together now, but basically the raid member who has the shield needs to soak as many of these overflowing energy balls as possible. And you'll need to have more and more shielded raid members as the fight goes on, coordinating who's taking which energy balls. If one hits, it's not going to wipe you, and in fact, you likely won't have anyone to soak the first couple of these balls coming down. But do your best. Okay, so we've handled that mechanic, hopefully. Now let's talk about the numerous other things going on. Ranged and heals need to worry about the suppression fields. The boss will charge out to them and smack the ground, creating one of these void zones. If you are in it, you take some damage and are also silenced. But check it. These suppression fields actually help you some. Remember those adds that spawn during the recharge phase? Those volatile anomalies will actually explode for some big AoE damage to the raid when they die, unless they die within a suppression field. Booyah! Park them in there as they die and no damage. Moving on, the rest of the mechanics are called Expel magic spells. These are done in sequence by the boss throughout the entire fight, unless of course he is recharging. Expel magic fire will put a small fire dot on the entire raid for 10 seconds. Once it expires, it will explode in a 5-yard radius for some big fire damage. The basic lesson is everyone needs to be spread out when it expires, of course. You can immune the application of the dot, but you can't immune the explosion at the end. Next up is a tank mechanic called Expel Magic Arcane. This puts a weird effect on the tanks. It makes them rapidly drop little void zones that explode for huge damage a few seconds later to anyone within 5 yards of it. It also causes them to take 100% more physical damage. The latter part is there, obviously, to force a tank swap. But even more so, the little explodey void zones means the tank needs to get away from everyone, so stay away as the tank runs and drops these void zones all over the place. Expel Magic Frost is the next one up. It drops an Orb of Frost that does a big chunk of AoE damage to the whole raid when it comes out, and then slows anyone within 20 yards of it by 85%. As you get further away, the snare effect isn't as bad. Just get out of it quickly. Lastly, Expel Magic Shadow hits all players with a very large heal absorption effect that prevents around 140k healing received. Healers need to get through that quickly so people don't take any additional damage and die. Last thing to note before we head to strategy. For every 10 seconds that the boss has his barrier, he will get a stacking damage buff. It's only about 6%, but it means you need to focus on that barrier so he doesn't slaughter the tanks. Now it's time to address strategy. The first thing you should probably set up is who is going to take the shield barriers during the boss's frequent recharging phases. I'd recommend range DPS, as the overflowing energy orbs can spawn all over the place. You don't want a tank or melee or healer to have to be distracted with messing around with it. That said, if someone accidentally gets it, they need to focus hardcore on catching the orbs. Tanks obviously need to swap off for Expel Magic Arcane, but also during the recharge they need to pick up the volatile anomalies. Then they need to tank them in the suppression fields, and melee DPS can beat on them. Range DPS should not be focused yet on killing the adds. They should be doing full damage to the boss because of the recharge phase. Once recharge is over, the whole raid should blast the adds and be back to handling the normal phase mechanics. Positioning-wise, you should try to avoid being in the center for the most part, especially when the boss's shield is about to be busted. It's also good to have the frost orbs dropped on the outside. They're usually dropped on the tanks, so just get ready to use a roar or something to get out quickly. Lastly, the healers should bust out healing throughput cooldowns to get through the Expel Magic Shadow debuff. So lots and lots of mechanics in here on Korog. Tanks swap for Expel Magic Arcane, run away with it, and then remember to tank the anomalies in the suppression fields. Healers heal hard through the Expel Magic Shadow debuff, and keep healing the caustic energy target while they get shield. DPS, if you are supposed to get the nullification shield, dip in and out, and then soak up the overwhelming energy orbs quickly. Otherwise, just try to stay away from suppression fields, and like the rest of the raid, explode your Expel Magic Fire away from everyone else. Thanks for watching, and as always, please comment, like, and or subscribe for the video if you found it helpful, and have a good one!